Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Shabbat, pages 107 through 113. Kuf Zayin, 107. Shmuel tells us, Kol Peturei de Shabbat Patur Aval Asur, that whenever the tractate Shabbat says that a person is Patur, it means that person is biblically exempt from liability, but the action was nonetheless rabbinically prohibited. Lebar mehanitlat, except for three very notable and famous exceptions. The patur mutar, where the word patur connotes totally permitted, even under rabbinical law. What are the three cases? Tsedat tzvi, the trapping of a deer, mephis mursa, the lancing of a boil, and tsedat nachash, the trapping of a snake. Under what parameters is the trapping of a snake totally permitted? So the Gemara tells us, patur, if you're involved with trapping so that the snake doesn't bite you, then you're exempt. If, however, you were trapping it for the sake of using the body of the snake for medicinal purposes, then you are liable. In other words, this is a case of malacha shenat tzricha legufa. You don't need the body of the malacha, so ordinarily such a case, according to Rabbi Shimon, would be patur aval asur, biblically exempt but rabbinically prohibited. Yet in the case of a snake, where we don't want you to suffer hezek, we don't want you to have physical suffering and pain, Chazal said it's totally permitted, mutar. 108. How do we know that you're only allowed to write tefillin on the hide of a kosher species of animal? Dichtiv, as it says in the Torah, Leman tihiyeh Torat Hashem beficha, that in the chapter of tefillin, the text of the Torah tells us that the word of Torah shall be in your mouth. The Torah of God shall be in your mouth. Min hamuta beficha. To which the Gemara explains that you're going to write the tefillin on items which are permitted to go in your mouth. That kosher food items, meaning properly slaughtered kosher species of animal, that is the kind of animal that has to be used for the writing of tefillin. 109. The Mishnah tells us, Kol ha'ochlin ochel adam l'refuah, that a person is allowed to eat any type of foodstuff for the sake of medicinal improvement. In other words, a sick person who actually intends to eat this foodstuff to get better as a type of medicine, and yet it's the kind of food that a healthy person would eat in the ordinary course because it tastes good, it's a regular food item, this sick person also can eat that food item, and no one needs to know that their intention in the back of their mind was that this item should serve some therapeutic purpose. 110. Kuf Yud. Kos shel ikarin. A person is not allowed to drink a cup of sterilization on Shabbat. So says the Mishnah. Why? Well, this is an example of refuah, of a forbidden type of therapeutic activity done on Shabbat. To which the Gemara wonders incredulously, Umi Shari, but is this ever allowed? Is a person ever allowed to do an act of sterilization? Doesn't the Torah forbid castration? The Torah does forbid castration. However, we can draw a distinction between a surgical act and the drinking of a potion which has indirectly causes a person to lose their reproductive potency. So this distinction is drawn between direct and indirect acts of sterilization, that the former is an egregious violation of Torah law, and the latter much less so, if at all. Kuf Yud Aleph, 111. Kol chayvei tvilot tovlin kedarkan, ben b'tisha b'av, ben b'yom kippurim. All those who are supposed to immerse in the mikveh to rid themselves of ritual impurity shall do so in the ordinary fashion on the night of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the fast day commemorating the destruction of the temple, and on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Why does the Gemara have to tell us this? What is the novelty of saying that a person who needs to immerse can do so on these 2 days? Well, the answer is because on those 2 days we have an obligation of inui nefesh, of afflicting our souls. And one of the 5 methods of inui nefesh, of afflicting our soul, is to refrain from bathing. Rechitza. So how could a person go into a ritual bath, which is effectively rechitza, on a day when that is forbidden? To this, the Gemara tells us, well, when there is a religious obligation to rid oneself of impurity, then that trumps concerns about rechitza and inui nefesh on these 2 special days. However, it should be noted that while the Gemara says that was the halacha in ancient times, in modern times, or at least in the era post-Shulchan Aruch, the tradition is not to immerse in the mikveh on Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur, even if it was the day scheduled for immersion. 112, Kuf Yud Bet. Here the Gemara tells us that there is a decline of the generations, that the spiritual stature of the various Jewish generations goes down over time. Yeridat Hadorot. How so? Im Rishonim b'nei Malachim, if our elders, our predecessors, were the sons of angels, Anu b'nei Anashim, then by comparison we are the sons of mere mortals. And if the earlier ones, our predecessors, were the sons of mortals, Anu kachamorim, then we are by comparison mere donkeys. And if we're going to say that we're like donkeys compared to our predecessors, not like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, which was a very special donkey, it was a religious donkey in that it wouldn't eat untithed produce, but rather we are like the ordinary donkey that doesn't know anything. So here the Gemara is explaining a very important point, that we have to have a healthy dose of respect for the religious standing of those who came before us, the prior generations, and that even if we think well of ourselves, by comparison, the greats of the game who came before us are still much greater than we are. Kuf Yud Gimel, 113. The Pasuk tells us in Yeshayahu, V'chi badeto, that we have an obligation to honor the Sabbath. Well, there are a variety of ways in which we can honor the Sabbath, but one of them is, Shelo Yehei Malbushcha Shel Shabbat, that the articles of clothing, one's attire on the Sabbath, should not be the same as one's attire on weekdays, but rather it should be that your Sabbath clothing is fancier, is more distinguished than that which you wear on an ordinary Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. If we turn to our ancestors who lived in more primitive and simple times and frugal times, let's say in Eastern Europe of 100 or 200 years ago, it was often the case that a Jew had only 2 articles of clothing, 2 shirts, one for the weekdays, Sunday through Friday, and one for Shabbat. And so even though there wasn't much money to go around for material goods, there was something special about the attire that one put on Shabbat. It was distinguished, it was dignified